Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic hypersonic.
Positronic hypersonic.
Positronic hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about The Bride, the new film written and directed by Maggie Gyllenhaal that was just released over the weekend, starring Christian Bale and Jessie Buckley from Harnett and Wicked Little Letters. So, as the film starts, speaking from the afterlife, Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, says she has a story she wanted to tell after Frankenstein, but couldn't due to her death. To tell it, she possesses Ida, a woman living in 1936 Chicago, who, while in one of these, possessed states, proceeds to discuss the criminal activities of mob boss Lupino that she's become familiar with by her association with him, causing Lupino's henchmen, Clyde and James, to pay a visit to Ida at her home and kill her by pushing her down the stairs. Elsewhere in Chicago, Frankenstein's monster, played by Christian Bale, arrives at the house of scientist Dr. Cornelia Euphranius, if I'm saying that correctly, whose work in reanimation he has read, asking her to create a companion for him. Euphranius, who nicknames the monster Frank, is only convinced when Frank says he thought she was a mad scientist, at which point both dig Ida up from her grave and, through machinery similar to that of Dr. Frankenstein's, revive her. Ida, suffering from amnesia, does retain vast knowledge and vocabulary that she at times speaks out in spurts. And at first, she's resistant to Frank, but he uses the fact that she has no real memory of her previous life to say that she was his bride and that she lost her memory in an accident. They both go out and end up watching a movie featuring Frank's favorite actor, Ronnie Reed, and then dance in a club. But as they leave, two men harass the bride, leading them to be killed by Frank and the bride together. Frank then tells the bride to run away from him, that he's only going to lead her into danger and trouble, but she decides to live life as a runaway with him. They stow away at one point on a train to New York City and end up killing a security guard who finds them stowed away there as the train passes through Indiana. In their New York hideout, when the bride asks for a real name, Frank thinks up Penelope Rogers, after Ginger Rogers, and she takes to it, asking that she be called Penny. At this point in the story, we're introduced to Detective Jake Wiles and his assistant, Myra Malloy, who are investigating the murders and who eventually follow Frank and the bride to New York. Frank and the bride then cause chaos in a screening of Revolt of the Zombies, and as they run from both the police and an angry mob, they hide by crashing a high-class party. Disguised as a waiter, Frank finds Ronnie Reed, his favorite actor, and expresses his fandom, but is dismissed. Angry, he proceeds to start dancing, and the bride joins him, at which point their dancing makes other partygoers enter a sort of trance and to do similar moves. The police then arrive, and the bride holds Reed at gunpoint while ranting, during which Detective Wiles starts to recognize her. Eventually, the bride and Frank run away after killing a policeman and hotwiring a car to leave the city. The bride's actions catch the attention of the media and inspire women in New York to start rioting, using the bride's crazy utterings as calls to action. And once the mobster Lupino recognizes her in the press, he kills James for failing to keep her dead and orders Clyde to work on the situation to basically get rid of her because she's spilling the beans about him, or has been anyway. While the bride and Frank appear to have vanished, Malloy notices reports of murders and appearances of people similar to them having shown up in cities where Reed's films were set, prompting her to ask Wiles to bring them to what she thinks is the next location that they're going to, Niagara Falls. They do find the couple, just as Frank had asked the bride to marry him. Wiles confronts the bride, calling her Ida, and she eventually shoots him in the foot before running away. As the couple drives away, Frank admits that he was just giving her a cover story to help mold her into the bride that he wanted. Meanwhile, Wiles uses the injury to ask for his retirement from the police, which his supervisors say they will only accept if he appointed a replacement for himself. So he gives his detective badge to Malloy. She eventually follows the couple to a drive-in theater in Illinois, where Frank hears his beloved say that after reflecting about her supposed past as Ida and her current experiences as Penny, she will now answer only to the bride. Clyde then catches up with the couple, shooting Frank in the head, prompting the bride to run away with his body. She drives straight to Dr. Euphranius, who says she doesn't feel capable of reviving Frank and just wants to study his decomposition. Clyde then breaks into the laboratory and shoots the bride, as do the police, who follow into the room, making Clyde escape through a window. Malloy arrives, shows her badge, and says that remaining there will not help and that they should actually go looking for Clyde. Once the police leave, Euphranius, seemingly possessed by Shelley's spirit, does in fact decide to revive the couple. From outside, Malloy sees bright lights shine from the laboratory, while inside, the revived corpses take each other's hands. That's where the movie cuts to credits, but during the credits, Lapino finds himself surrounded by the raiders inspired by the bride, who are intent on killing him, and that's where the movie ended. So, when I first saw the trailer for this movie, I immediately thought that I wanted to see it because, the Frankenstein story, which of course encompasses the bride, is an iconic Gothic horror universe, and the idea that it was going to be dropped into 1936 was very intriguing to me. And the bits of Jessie Buckley's performance that I saw in the trailer just really grabbed me. And that's because she is unbelievably fantastic in this part in the movie. She actually also plays Mary Shelley. So whenever you see Mary Shelley in the story, which you kind of only see her face and it's not that often, but she's also playing Shelley in this movie. She's just fantastic. The film is very much worth watching just for her performance because it's amazing, and I think she should be nominated for a bunch of awards and win a bunch of awards for this performance. That having been said, this movie is not very good. Christian Bale does a competent job as Frank, and if I'm honest, I like the depiction of Frank as a character in this story. He's just a regular guy who happens to be back from the dead, so I thought that was cool. But I think the part is beneath his talents, first of all, because it's kind of a paper-thin character. And I know I just said that I like the depiction of the character in the movie, but I like that they showed Frankenstein in a different way. What I don't like is that it's very one-dimensional, the Frank character in this movie. There's no real arc for the character in the movie. It never really gets beyond the one dimension or one note that it starts off at in the film. So that was disappointing. I think the bride character does have an arc, and that's good. But I think the movie would be better if they had shown us more about what her life was like before she was initially killed, so that we could have something to contrast her existence as the bride against. And we really don't have that. And so I think that kind of takes a lot of the punch out of it. She talks a bit about how she feels this urge to be rebellious and sort of stand on her own and take what she wants. But you don't really see in this movie ever how her life before being the bride was the opposite of that, and how she wasn't really able to do that in her prior life, which you kind of intuit is the reason that she feels the way she feels as the bride, but they don't show it to you that that's why she feels that way. So you kind of sort of just making that up in your head to explain why she is the way she is now. And I think it would have been more impactful to see her arc play out if we had seen what her life was like before, and we never really get to see that. Not only that, but from the point at which she's revived, she kind of gets a new beginning and is a blank slate. And the period of time that she spends in that state is like a nanosecond. And so the entire time that the character is on screen, she's pretty much the same character and isn't different at the end of the movie than she is once that initial nanosecond is over and she starts to really be Frank's girl. And so that was disappointing, because what it makes the movie is a series of scenes that are basically the same scene, just sort of redressed over and over again. It's the same sort of dance over and over again between these two characters. There is a point at which they are intimate, and Frank has never been intimate before. And so, that's a sort of evolution for them as a couple, but it's not enough. And it doesn't justify the repetition of the sort of one kind of scene that this movie just keeps repeating over and over between those two characters. And, it's not a short movie. It's a good 2 hours. And there are other scenes that pad out the runtime or that fill out the runtime that focus on the detective and his assistant or whatever. And I found almost none of that to be worthwhile. It was just filler, really, in this movie. I found none of those scenes to be worthwhile. And speaking of scenes like that, there's literally a scene like that with the Lupino character that is completely superfluous to the movie. And it wouldn't have been superfluous if there were a couple of more scenes involving him. So where you could see, okay, he's playing a part in this narrative and he's a part of what's happening to these characters, but it's never shown to be that. He has one scene in the movie, and except for a couple of moments, you never really feel his presence in the movie, nor the presence of his henchmen who are trying to stop the bride from talking. It's just tacked on. And so the movie ends up being way longer than it has gas for in terms of the runtime. What is there is repetitive very early on. And the other scenes that are there, which aren't repetitive, that are filler basically, that, you know, the detective part, don't add to the narrative in any way that makes it have more depth or emotional resonance. And so what you've got is a very uninspired movie for the most part. The concept is inspired. There are, you know, moments that do convey some feeling and that do resonate with emotional depth, but they are buried under so much that's repetitive, superfluous, and just not at all interesting. And I've been reading that people are walking out of this movie, you know, because of that. And I have to say that I find that funny because while I was watching it, I kept looking at how much runtime was left. And I kept going, geez, how much longer is this going to go on, this movie? Like, how far into it are we already? And, you know, when is it going to go somewhere or get good? And I stuck with it because, you know, it's going to be talked about. I knew it was going to be a movie that was going to be talked about because it's so different. And, you know, because it's a genre film. And I knew I was probably going to do my own review for that reason. And so I wanted to be able to see the whole thing. And also because, as I said, you cannot take your eyes and ears off of Jessie Buckley in this movie. She's fantastic. And it is worth seeing this entire not so good movie just to take in her full performance because she's amazing in it. But yeah, I understand why people are walking out of this movie. I'm someone who's never done that. I've never walked out of a movie I've paid for. I probably never will. Certainly not without getting a refund. But I'm sad to report that it just isn't a good movie. And I only hope that Jessie Buckley is recognized for her fantastic performance because otherwise she pretty much made this movie for nothing. It's just not good. It's not a good movie. And I feel badly for Maggie Gyllenhaal, who I think is a brilliant actress as well, and whose stuff I tend to like. But something went wrong somewhere. She should have had maybe co-writers. If she didn't, I haven't looked. And if she did have co-writers, maybe she shouldn't work with them again. But I have to fault her as a writer here. And I just hope, you know, the fact that this movie is flopping hard doesn't damage her career because I think she's a brilliant actress and I see no reason why she shouldn't have a chance to write and direct again, assuming she learns from this experience. So I just hope it doesn't, you know, damage her prospects. Anyway, that's really all there is to say. At best, it's a 3 out of 5, and that's because of Jessie Buckley's performance, and that's really all there is to it. So I'm going to get out of here. I'll be back with another video soon. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.